Hi everyone, welcome to Newegg TV. My name is Paul and this is the new ASUS Sabertooth Z77 motherboard. Now, if you are not familiar with the Z77 chipset, it's the new chipset that's coming from Intel. It launches in line with their new third generation Core i3, i5, and i7 processors. The code name for those up to now has been Uefi Bridge. Now this is a Sabertooth motherboard, so you do get a 5-year warranty by virtue of the tough components that they've used, as well as all the validation that they do on this. So I'm going to give you guys some more information about Uefi Bridge, as well as compatibility as I go over all of the different features. First off, let's just take a look at some of the little icons down here. So supports the Intel Core processors, and again, backwards compatible with Sandy Bridge. So if you've got a Sandy Bridge processor, you can drop one of those in here. If you upgrade to a new Uefi Bridge 3rd generation core processor, you can use one of those as well. You get the Z77 chipset, which has some new features from Intel. There is the LGA support. So we got LGA 1155 socket, again, same as the Sandy Bridge socket from last year. Supports 22 nanometer Uefi Bridge processors, as well as the 32 nanometer Sandy Bridge processors. You also get the Intel Smart Response technology, Rapid Start, Smart Connect. If you're not familiar with Smart Response, it was introduced with the Z68 chipset that allows for SSD caching. Now this motherboard also supports 2-way SLI and 2-way Crossfire X. The Uefi Bridge processors will have an internal GPU, so they come with an integrated GPU that's optional. You can use it or you can use a discrete card, and by way of the Lucid Virtue MVP technology, you can actually actively switch back and forth between using the iGPU or a discrete graphics card. Now, since this is the Sabertooth series, ASUS puts a lot of work into the design of the board and as well as the validation of all the components. So here is a long list of all the stuff that's included with the board. For starters, at the top you have thermal armor, which is some plastic PCB that is covering the entire board. It helps protect the board, and it's also designed with some airflow in mind. You also get thermal radar, and ASUS has put a ton of thermal testing points scattered around the motherboard. So if you're really concerned about thermals, as you can see in this little diagram right there, there are thermal sensors everywhere that you can use to more accurately determine your motherboard temperature. You get Dust Defender, which I'll show you when we get in the box. They have protection for all the ports to make sure you don't get dust up in there. It uses tough components. They're certified military standard, and that's part of the reason why you get the extended 5-year warranty with this board. It uses DigiPlus power control, so not only for the CPU VRMs, but the CPU, the iGPU, and the DRAM all has digital power delivery, so that helps control your voltages, make sure you maintain stable overclocks, and also make sure you maintain system stability overall. This has this awesome feature called Uefi Bios Flashback, which means that if you ever get your BIOS to a point where you cannot go back from, even if you have, for instance, a corrupted BIOS, you can actually use just a USB stick. You plug it into the correct port with the BIOS loaded on the USB stick. You hit the BIOS Flashback button, and it will automatically copy the BIOS from your USB stick. So one of the easiest ways that I've found in a lot of motherboards that you can actually update your BIOS. You also have Network Eye Control, which is a simple feature they've integrated to help to prioritize your network traffic. So if you have, probably mostly going to use this for gaming, but other programs you might have that need exclusive network access, you can give them priority over other programs. You can also do some scheduling with that as well. You also get the Uefi Bios that ASUS has worked so much on. You get USB 3.0 boost, so with the As Media add-on USB 3.0 controllers, you use this technology to increase your USB 3 traffic speed. You get a USB charger port, so I'll show you guys that as well. You get 1.5 amps on that charging port, so you can charge up devices such as tablets much faster than you would normally. You get electrostatic protection, the guards that are scattered across the board as well. You get the ASUS Excellent AI Suite 2 software, which you can use for temperature monitoring as well as to control a lot of the advanced features of this board. And then, of course, complete USB 3.0. That's a lot for the box. Let's take a look at the accessories. So, inside the box, we have this piece of plastic. It's very exciting. We have, of course, the motherboard itself, which we're going to look over at the very end, and then we have all of our accessories here. So what do we have? We have a couple fans, and these are made to go along with the thermal armor, so you can plug those in some pretty cool cooling solutions with the thermal armor. That's easier to show you once I get the board out of the box. Here's your input-output shield, so use that on the back of your case, specifically set up for all the inputs and outputs on this particular motherboard. Here's one of my favorite pieces of any motherboard, and that's a Q connector. Q connector right there. Use that to plug in your front panel connectors to this block and then plug the block into your motherboard. They also give you a USB one there too if you happen to have individual pinouts for a USB 2.0 port. You get some, wait, what are these? These are Sata cables. I was just seeing if there's any more. I know these are Sata cables. You get 4 Sata cables in the box. These are all Sata Rev 1, 2, or 3 compatible. They have clips on one end, so that will keep them securely locked, and all of these have L brackets on one of the 2 ends. You also get, these are all your protective pieces, and I'm going to take these out once I get the motherboard out so I can show you where those go. You do get an Sli bridge there as well, so if you're running an NVIDIA SLI solution, you can use that. If you're running a AMD Crossfire X configuration, those bridges typically come with the video cards, the AMD video cards. You get a decal here, so you can use that on a case side window, something like that. It says tough inside, the ultimate force. We have some extra inserts here for stuff like HDMI version 1.4 3D, as well as some ASUS motherboard SATA mode notice. So they put your SATA ports in AHCI mode by default, which I think is fantastic. If you're using any newer mechanical hard drive, or especially an SSD and Windows 7, that's what you want it to be in. And they've done that by default and just given you a little extra information there. This is stuff about those thermal armor protective covers. Again, I'm going to show you that in a sec. Here is your certificate of reliability for the Sabertooth Z77. All these components are individually tested to military standards, and there's your nice thick card there to prove it. You get your Tough Series 5-year warranty notice right there, so the information about your 5-year warranty. And finally, you get your motherboard user guide, which you should always keep on hand while you're doing your build to make sure you're plugging everything into the right ports. Inside here, you also get the Sabertooth Z77 driver disc, so that'll have your drivers for all the components on the motherboard. It's usually best to head over to the ASUS website to download the latest drivers for the motherboard, but you can keep this on hand, for instance, in case your network interface card is not recognized right off the bat. You can load your driver for that off the disk and then connect to the internet to download the rest of your stuff. Also in there, which I'm going to try to, there you go, there's a powered by ASUS case badge. And that's it for accessories. Let's take a look at the motherboard. So here's a look at the Sabertooth Z77 itself, which probably looks pretty different from a lot of motherboards you've seen, unless you're familiar with the Sabertooth line, of course. The first thing that you see is this thermal armor protective plastic covering that's covering up a lot of the components on the board. Serves 2 purposes. One is to keep the components protected, of course, underneath it. You can't damage those because they are protected. And then also, specifically up here and right here, you can add a couple fans to this so you get more active cooling and channeled airflow across some of the heat sinks that are underneath that. So we'll talk more about that in a second. Apart from that, I wanted to start off by pointing out where the various fan headers are. There's 2 3-pin fan headers on the board, and that's for these little fans that are included. You can install one right here, and you can install one up here. And both of these have dedicated fan headers. So there's a 3-pin fan header right under there, and then another 3-pin fan header up here at the top. Apart from that, you have an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have an additional 6 4-pin fan headers. 2 of those are for the CPU right up here at the top, CPU fan and CPU optional fan. You also get a chassis fan header right up there. You get an additional 4-pin header right there above the 24-pin power connector, and then 2 more 4-pin fan headers down here at the bottom. So let's go over all the components on the board individually, and we'll start down here in the bottom right. So here are your front panel connectors. You'll use that with the Q connector. You can plug that whole block into the white pinouts right there. Next to that, again, those 4-pin fan headers. Next to that, we have 3 USB 2.0 headers. Those are all protected by these little plastic covers, and that's your dust defender, which involves both the covers for these USB 2.0 ports, as well as some of these little plastic bits, which I will show as I get to the parts where they fit into. To the left of that, you have a system power LED, so that will tell you if the system has power or if it's on standby. Generally, if you have the power supply connected and the power on, that will light up and let you know that you have good power. You also have a Cmos Reset button right there, so you can clear the real-time clock info in the Cmos by switching that jumper over. You also get a debug port right there. You have a front panel audio connector right there, and above it an optical SPDIF out. Here's where all of your audio connectors are, and you get a Realtek ALC 892 8-channel high-definition audio system built into this board. And then above that is where all of your PCI Express slots are. Now this motherboard is, as previously mentioned, can fit Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge processors. That's 2nd generation Intel Core processors or 3rd generation Intel Core processors. These PCI Express slots here are compatible with PCI Express 2.0 or 3.0. So if you use a Sandy Bridge processor, the internal PCI Express controller there is a PCI Express 2.0. If you get a newer 3rd generation Ivy Bridge processor, it's got PCIe 3.0, and that effectively doubles the bandwidth available on your PCI Express ports. So for starters, up at the top, you got a single speed, actually 3 single speed PCI Express ports, 1, 2, and 3, and then you get 3 full-length 16 physically 16-speed PCI Express ports. So top one here is wired all the way up for full 16-speed PCI Express. That's where you want to plug in your main video card. It's got an open slot beneath it, so if you're using a two-slot card, which most of them are these days, you won't even be losing that slot below it. You also have this port right here, which is wired up for 8X. If you run both of these in 2-card SLI or Crossfire X mode, they'll run at 8X each. Remember, that's PCI Express 3.0, which is effectively the same bandwidth as 16X for PCI Express 2.0. Hope I'm not confusing you guys too much. Finally, you have an additional full-length PCI Express slot down there at the bottom, and that will run at 4-speed. Moving on over here to the right, we have a handsome ASUS heatsink right there, and that is covering up your Z77 chipset. Z77 chipset handles several different things, among them being some of your serial ATA ports. So here's your SATA ports. You also have a USB 3.0 port right there. That's a front panel header, so you can plug in your 20-pin your 20-pin USB 3.0 header right there, and that's actually controlled by the Z77 chipset. You get 4 USB 3.0 ports controlled by the Z77 chipset, and then ASUS has added a few more with an ASMedia controller. These 6 SATA ports on the right are all controlled by Z77. You have 2 SATA Revision 3 6 gigabit per second ports right there, the brown ones. These black ones are all SATA Revision 2 3 gigabits per second, and then you have 2 more SATA Revision 3 6 gigabit per second ports on the left side, and those are controlled by an add-on ASMedia 1061 SATA controller. Moving up the side of the board, let me just set it back down here. You have your primary power connector for the motherboard. That's 24-pin. Above that, the 4-pin fan header I mentioned earlier. Above that, you have an MEM-OK button, and you can use that if you're having any issues with your memory compatibility. It will cycle through settings to verify that your memory is installed correctly and that's going to work at the proper speed. So very handy for boot testing. Also next to that is a DRAM LED. There's actually several LEDs scattered around this board. There's one here for DRAM, there's another one for CPU, there's another one sort of here by the USB 3.0 port for your boot device, another one over there by your PCI Express port for your video card. Those will light up if it detects there's a problem with that, so you can easily just look and tell if you have any defective component. Your motherboard will usually point that out. Next to that is your DDR3 memory slot. So you get 4 DDR3 memory slots. It supports DDR3 speeds of up to 1866. You can fit 8 gigabyte sticks in here, so 4 times 8 gigabytes. If you use the maximum memory size, you can have up to 32 gigabytes. It's dual channel memory, so you want to populate at least 2 of these. And then one of the features that I have been talking about is Dust Defender. So they provided you with these little inserts for these memory slots, so you can just pop them in just like you would a typical RAM stick. It'll lock into place, and essentially that's going to protect the slot there, so if you're not using it, it's not going to get cluttered with dust, and it'll make sure if you do add memory there in the future, you don't have any dust bunnies in the way to interfere with that connection. To the left of that, we have the main event here, which is our 1155 socket. It has this new cover here, which is pretty cool, I have to say. You leave the cover on while you install your CPU, so you pop open the bracket here, the opens up to expose your LGA socket under there, 1155. You drop in your Sli Bridge or Uefi Bridge processor. You close this guy, which will put some pressure on that, and keeps that socket covered. And then you just pop this off when you're done, and you don't have exposed pins like I've just done right now, which is, you always want to keep protected as much as possible. I'm just going to put that back on later. Next up, let's talk about power delivery, which you can kind of see up there around the side. You actually have 8 plus 4 plus 2 phase power delivery, all controlled by your digital DigiPlus VRMs. Right there, delivering power to the CPU, to the iGPU, as well as to your DRAM. Let's see, what am I forgetting? Oh, all the way up here at the top, we have our supplemental CPU power connector. That's an 8-pin port right there for EPS power. You want to plug that in to make sure that you have enough power, especially if you're going to be overclocking your CPU. And then to the left of that, again, here is where you can add an additional fan that drops in right below there, and that helps provide some airflow underneath the thermal armor protective covering. Now, I nearly forgot here, if I flip this around to the back, there's actually some additional mounting holes. Well, I shouldn't say mounting holes. This is the back side of your LGA 1155 socket right there. Now, there's some additional actually holes through the motherboard here that you normally wouldn't see. There's a couple right here, a couple over here, and a couple down here below the socket. Now, what that's designed to do is actually provide airflow behind the motherboard, because you get heat buildup back here as well as in front of the motherboard. So if you use these fans and install them here and here, that will actually put some positive pressure underneath there, help circulate airflow behind the board, and provide some additional cooling, which helps keep your components lasting as long as they can, and it also helps system stability, because you want to keep your components as cool as possible at all times. Let's move along here to our inputs and outputs on the back of the motherboard. So first off, if you look right through that gap right there, you can see where one of those fans would be installed. That actually serves as an intake to pull fresh air from outside of your case back in and direct it over the 2 heat sinks that are here and here, which are cooling your VRMs. On the left side here, you have 4 USB 2.0 ports. There's that USB Bios Flashback option right there. Here are the 2 USB 3.0 ports. Those are controlled by the ASMedia controller. At the bottom, you have 2 eSATA ports. Those are also controlled by an add-on ASMedia 1061 SATA controller. So you can do some eSATA there. That's SATA revision 3, 6 gigabit per second. You have an optical Toslink out right there. Here are your video outs for the integrated GPU and your Sli Bridge or Uefi Bridge processor. So you got HDMI and DisplayPort available right there. You have Intel network interface card right there, so high quality Intel NIC, which is very handy to have. Also increased compatibility. It's one of the best network interface cards that you can get, especially when you're talking about integrated onto motherboard versions. 2 more USB 3.0 ports right there. Again, those are controlled by the Z77 chipset. And then finally here you have your analog sound outputs for your 8-channel Realtek high-definition audio. And I knew I had overlooked something, so forgot the dust defenders for the PCI slots. So right here we have the single length or X1 PCI slot cover. As you can see, pops in just like that to protect your PCI slot, and also gives it a nice clean look for the rest of the motherboard with that tough armor. You also get full-length ones here for the Pci Express 16-speed slots. And one nice little added bonus of this is that if you have that slotted in there, and you pop it out, and let's say you want to remove your video card or something like that, you can actually use these, since they're plastic, they're non-conductive, to pop down your little release slot right there. So use this, don't use a screwdriver if you need to do that. Now, I know there are probably some features of this board that I've overlooked completely, but that's just because there's a lot of features of this board. But I did want to point out a couple more in closing here. One is called Fan Overtime. That's a feature I've seen in some power supplies up to this point, but this is the first time I've seen it on a motherboard. And that is that if you use these supplemental fans, you can add here and here for your thermal armor, protective covering, and airflow. Those fans will actually continue to spin after you've powered your system off, and that's to help cool down the VRMs and the components that have gotten hot, to overall lengthen the life of the components themselves. Also, you have the Fan Expert 2, which is a software control, so you can use that if you download the ASUS utilities that go along with the motherboard. And that actually has an auto-tuning feature, that will reach out to the fans that you have connected to the 4-pin headers on the board. We'll test their RPMs and we'll automatically adjust them to give you optimal airflow, or you can go into a manual mode to have some really in-depth control over the additional case fans you have on your system as well. That is going to wrap it up for this video. Once again, this has been the ASUS Sabertooth Z77 motherboard featuring the 1155 socket with compatibility for Intel's 3rd generation Core i3, i5, and i7 processors, also featuring the Z77 chipset. I'm Paul with Newegg TV, and if you enjoyed today's video, please head over to our Newegg YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe for more tech videos. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.